Hi there, welcome back to Still Waters ASMR. Today we are going to be reading a poem in Shetland dialect, and then I'll go through the poem again and translate it into English for you. I think the poem sounds nice in dialect, and it also is very clever imagery, and it's quite a funny story. So it's quite nice to then also translate it into English for you. I'm actually redoing this because I read it through already and I kind of got a bit too animated. So I'll try and keep it relaxing ASMR sort of nature. So the poem I'm going to be reading is Scranna. It's one we studied at school because here in Shetland we actually also study Shetland dialect in the English class, which is ironic. But they're trying to keep local languages alive. And it's a poem by a well-known Shetland author called Haldane Burgess. So it's Scranna. The deal he came down to the hill to Scranna, but grinned or smautman or slapped the risana. And say wi' a glumps and a deal's ain glower, he spat on his lips and clammed tently hour. I was sitting in my lane by the sheik of the fire, wi' my een on the spunks as they ale up at higher. Then slocket and fell, I thinking alas, say man his glory just ate S. When seaman gets out with the fearsomest growl, it was mostly in yacht pet body and soul. Then he hears on the brigstains the moving of coots, and the footsteps of some een wee neisted boots. And say to the door comes an Affleck bung, and some een speaks up at the English tongue, but good faith the butt end wasn't all to be seen, so I sings out come in and your clivics be clean. Next minute I hears a grit scrippin' and skrittin', but I never stirs out o' where I was sittin'. And seaman I yawks with a slack of the lug, and says heady tongue wee studi, doon with the dug. Then I sees with his hand on the snack of the door, a gentleman bralick and wheel clad afore, wi' a lang taily coat and a black pair of breeks, a silk hat and sidelights on baith o' his cheeks. Well, Rasmus, good evening, he says with a smile, and we out wi' his hand in the hameliest style. I can't know at first what ill health it could be, so I says faith ye hae the advantage of me. He makes me the answer, but smiles a the mair, and say without bidding he draws in a share. And up to the fire he gies Eve at a shiv, wi' a soon just the same as a skrit of the cliff. I looks at his fit, and he clicks at a wa, and sticks out his knee till the breeks hides it a. But he was our lit, and I thinks I to mysel, and I read to the boy, the address would be hell. But he thinks I saw nothing, and say he be good, wi' a voice kind of pleasant and no very loud. I observe you don't know me, although we have met. With this on the creepy his silk hat he said, you are looking much older and rather careworn. Yeah, I says it's a while now since Rasmi was born, and you dinna grow young like we following the sea. But what, think ye, would you be wanting of me? Oh, he says, smiling soft, I have dropped in along, just to say as a friend that I think you are wrong, in some of your views about life and all that. And he sleeked the croon o' his lang sheening hat, and he hunkled himself for his cot was gien swint, wi' a weight that he hid i' the pocket a hint. Then he pulls off his gloves, and his twa hands I saw, with the nails just the same as the nib of the craw. So to hide them he folded his arms at eens, and his eens looked at me as sharp like his brains. Then he says, look at me, I've been years in the kirk. I admit you may think I got in by a quirk. I dispense the communion, I preach, I baptise. You can manage it all with a few handy lies, as some people call them in vulgar parlance. Reservations we term them, we men who advance. Yeah, I says, there's ma doot you can shuffle the cards. I warrant you'll be now a master of arts. Then he kicked a pit wi' his butt in the flame, and said he felt cauld when he wasn't at him. And he takes fae his pocket a bit of a flask, and says, Rasmus, are you tea, may I ask? Yeah, I says, in the meantime I haste my desire to swee wi' yon mixture of blood and of fire. Oh, it's fine, have a wet. No, says I, no sip. And he puts it awa and he draws out his pipe. and he surely forget for doon his hand gings, and he lifts a hit call without taking the tings. You're at him with the fire, then I says wi' a grin, and with this hath he slips it and looks kind of tern. But he smiles in his minute, and nods through the smoke, and he says, you are rather a humorous bloke. Don't you think now that you are a little adrift? Don't you think now you'd like to succeed, get a lift? To be something decent, some big reverend Don? To distinguish yourself, man, in fact to get on? You're as simple tonight as you were in your youth. The thing that pays best is what I call the truth. That is the view which I wish to reveal, says I, faith I doot honest man get the deal. Then he smirked at me, and he sleeked his hair, for his horn was cocked again in the air. Well, supposing I am now, says he nodding thrice, though it comes from the devil, it's still good advice. I'll tell you what, Rasmus, just listen, keep cool. You're a great many different kinds of a fool. You scoundrel, says I, and I rise to me fit. Out o' this wi' thee, hent thee style heckle no flit. Then I gies his silk hat a grit rise wi' me clug, and slips me grip up a poor, say Mrs. Lug. Wha thinking it time for to gie him a sag, sank his yackles fair into the bow's leg. So he springs till his fit, and makin' a claw, for me gansy he clures by the shouders awa. Wi' ee hand I grips down the breast o' his cot, and I yawks wi' the ither the slack o' strot. Then his fist comes as black as the very ill held, and he aims me a lick just under the belt. Wid do villain, I yalls getting mad, and say wi' the cuff o' his neck, tacks the lad, and there on the floor as we stood at the midst, I shacks him the same as the boogie sids, till I feels me auld arms beginning to tire. Then awa he goes fair on his sit at the fire, but he up and say out o' his pooch o' his cot. Cam the tail he hid there around up in a knot. It lies on the floor for a minute and smocks, then spoot to the length like the jack of the box. And seaman he yawks the smart end in his jaws, and scrits at it fierce like we baith o' his paws. Then we razzles again, and good trath I'll be bound, for a quarter an hour you'd no heard the sound, but the skrit o' a share and the clump o' clug, the skrit o' a clive and the yelp o' the dug, and he strack now and then, as he strack now and then, at the crooked links. With the lads, when the lad swang his tail, you know his jinks. For seaman poor trow wi' his legs in a bang, he'd hustling around like the stain of the sling. Then I draws him wi' force, by to the door, and with this he comes out wi' an ominous roar. And out o' me hair he clatters a gawping. Now the door sin he left it was still a grain open. Wi' me clogtae I wrestles her clean to the back, and a yock for the slack o' his breeks that I mak, and tacks him a hist wi' a mention of strength, and say on the breekstains I lands him his length. And dad's to the door, Maeslin's lying and coom, the pert o' his end was still i' the room. Then he sprinkles like sin, and he pluts wi' a wail, "Oh, look out, man, raz me, you're brooking me tail." So after a minute I ages the door, and he arrives his tail foot through the crack of this wi' a snore, and seaman poor worm, still rowding a knot, strikes the jam of the door wi' a deuce like a shot. So he strip it off, and he yicks and growls, and then when he canna went out sits and yowls. In the meantime the black boy he breathes him a bit, then he comes for the door wi' a rip where he's fit, and he hunches wi' poor wi' his clive to the stain. But the maist that he hearn was his ain shooter bane, for there's I stood path, I sleek at her fast, wi' the tae o' me clug like the steep of the mast. Then after a start wi' his mouth at the hall, he says wi' a sound it was maistly after all, as he twists his fist up and girned and shammed, "Nee, Rasmus, I'll get thee, do sure to be damned." "Nah, faith, I says, boy, I'll dress me as faith." Then he hanked his tail o'er his elbeck and left. So, the poem Scranna. So Scranna is the name of the poem, and it is the name of the croft where Razmi lives. So Razmi is the main character in the story. He's an older crofter. So here in Shetland we have crofter, like small farms. So we have the scene, we have a little old traditional button ben style house called Scranna, and a little old man called Rasmus, not a little but an old man, Rasmi, who lives there, or Rasmus is his full name. So I'll read each line again in dialect and then translate it into English for you. The deal he came down to the hill de Scranna. That's the devil, he came down to the hill wall of Scranna. So the hill wall separates the sort of the homestead from the hill grazing. But grinder sma opening or slap did he sana. But gate or small opening or gap there he saw not. And say we a glumps and a deal's in glower. And so with a snot and the devil's own glower, or glare, he spat on his lutz and climbed tenderly over. He spat on his palms and climbed carefully over. I was sitting me lane by the sheik of the fire. I was sitting alone by the side of the fire. We my een on the spunks as they ale up a tire. With my eyes on the sparks as they leapt higher. Then slocket and fell, I thinking alas. So the sparks were sort of sparking up and then going out and then falling back down, and he was thinking alas. Say man in his glory just S-A to S. So man and his glory just ashes, like ash to ash. Ashes to ash. When Seaman gets out with the fearsomest growl, so Seaman is the name of his dog, so when the dog comes out with a fearsome growl, it was mostly enough to part body and soul. It was mostly enough to part body and soul. Then I hear on the brigstains the moving of coots. So brigstains are like your like flagstones outside the front door, like your kind of footpath. So then I hear on the footpath outside the sound of feet. And the footsteps of someone with Eastern boots, and the footsteps of someone with squeaking boots. And say to the door comes an awful bong, and so to the door comes a terrible bang, and someone speaks up the English tongue, and someone speaks up in the English tongue, so, rather than someone speaking in dialect, it's someone speaking in English. But good faith, the butt end wasn't ill to be seen. Good faith is like an exclamation. I'm trying to think of how to translate that. The house it doesn't look bad. It's not ill to be seen. It's not basically doesn't the butt end of the house I mentioned about butt and ben houses. They were just simple 2-room dwellings where you'd sleep in one, and then the other side is like the living area where you sit and cook and everything. And that butt end, the end where they do all the cooking and living, it was presentable. So I sings would come in and your clivics be clean. Now this is where they have quite clever imagery. So Rasmus at this point doesn't know it's a devil coming to visit, but he's just using a kind of figure of speech. He's like singing out, "Come in, and your hooves be clean." And the next minute I hear a great scripping and scritting. The next minute I hear a great scraping and scratching. But I never stirs out of where I was sitting. But he never stirs out of where he was sitting. And Seaman I yokes by the slack of the lug, so he grabs the dog by the slack of the ear, and says, "Heady tongue, whisht woody doondy dug," and says, "Hold your tongue, quiet with you, down with you, dog." Then I sees with his hand on the snick of the door. Then I see with his hand on the latch of the door a gentleman bralic and wheel clad afore. A gentleman bralic, looking good and like wheel clad afore, like well dressed. A well dressed, sort of presentable looking gentleman. With a lang taily coat and a black pair of breeks. So it's a long coat with, like one of those formal coats, the tails, and a black pair of trousers. a silk hat and side licks on both of his cheeks, a silk hat and sideburns on both of his cheeks. Well, Rasmus, good evening, he says with a smile. So it's interesting how at this point the devil is speaking in English in a very, putting on this English voice. It's like, well, Rasmus, good evening, he says with a smile. And out with his hand, the Heimliya style, and so puts out his hand in a very friendly manner. I can't know at first what ill-health it could be. So this is where it's quite, again, that clever imagery. I didn't know at first who the devil it could be, not knowing it was the devil. So I says, Feth, you had the advantage of me. So Feth, it's very much a sort of exclamation. It's like kind of, goodness, you have the advantage of me. I don't know who you are. He marks me the answer, but smiles at him here. So the devil doesn't respond, just smiles more. And say without bidding, he throws in a chair, and without being asked, he pulls up a chair. And up to the fire he gives Eve a shiv. We as soon just the same as the sklit of the cliff. So up to the fire he pushes one of his feet, with a sound just the same as the scratch of a hoof. I looks at his foot and he clicks it a while. Erasmus looks at the devil's foot. The devil pulls it back and sticks with his knee till the breeks hoys it and he puts his knee forward to kind of so the trousers hide his foot. But he was overlit, and I think to myself, but he was overlate. I think he was too slow in his actions, and I think to myself, and I read to the boy, the address would be hell. So Rasmus is thinking to himself, if I was to write to you, boy, the address would be hell. So at this point, Rasmus knows exactly who it is that he's dealing with. But he thinks I saw nothing and say he be good, with a voice kind of pleasant and not very loud. So the devil doesn't think that Rasmus has seen anything, and so he began, with a voice rather pleasant and not very loud. I observe you don't know me, although we have met. With this on the creepy, his silk hat he said, and so with that he put his hat on a stool. You are looking much older and rather careworn. Yeah, I said it's a while now since Rasmus was born. Saying yes, it's been a while now since I was born. And you dinna grow young like we following the sea, but what think ye would you be wanting of me? Saying yeah, it's a while since I was born and you don't grow young by going out to sea, so he's obviously been a seafarer in his time. But what think you are you wanting with me? Kind of, what do you want? Oh, he says, smiling soft, I have dropped in along, so smiling softly, just to say as a friend that I think you are wrong in some of your views about life and all that. And he sleeked the croon o' his lang shinin hat, so he kind of smoothed the top of his kind of top hat, the silk hat that he has. And Hinkled himself for his coat was getting schwint, so he kind of like shrugged himself because his coat had gone squint. We waited he hid the pocket a hint, so there was a weight in the pocket at the back of his coat that was making it go squint, so he was shrugging it to get the coat corrected. Then he pulls off his gloves, and his twa hands I saw, with the nails just the same as the knee of the cra. Devil takes his gloves off, and Rasmus sees his 2 hands, and he sees that the nails on his hands are just the same as the nib of the cra. I think that's like the beak of the crow. The nib. I don't think that's the claws of the crow. I think it's actually the beak. And so to hide them, he folded his arms at ends. So he folds his arms to hide his hands. And his eens looked at me sharp like his preens, and he's looking at Rasmus with, sharp eyes as sharp as pins. Then he says, look at me, I have been years in the kirk. I admit you may think I got in by a quirk. I dispense the communion, I preach, I baptize. You can manage it all with a few handy lies, as some people call them in vulgar parlance. Reservations we term them, we men who advance. And so obviously the devil's been sort of influencing the local church life, apparently, and appearing to be respectable and above board and having a position of quite authority and everything. Yeah, I says, there's small doubt you can shuffle the cards. I warrant you'll be new a master at it. And Rasmus is responding, going, yeah, there's small doubt you can shuffle the cards. I imagine you'll be now a master of arts. Then he kicked a pit with his butt into flame. And he said he felt cold when he wasn't at home. So the devil kicks a peat in the fire. That's things we cut out of the ground and burn for fuel. He kicks the peat with his boot into flame and says he feels cold when he's not at home. And he tacks for his pocket the bit of a flask and says, Rasmus, are you to tea, may I ask? The devil takes a hip flask from his pocket and is asking Rasmus if he drinks. Are you teetotal, may I ask? Yeah, I says, in the meantime I haste my desire to swee with yon mixture of blood and of fire. And Rasmus is saying, yep, yeah, I'm teetotal, and kind of, even if I wasn't, I have no desire to be sort of to swee with yon mixture, to burn with that mixture of blood and of fire. Because to swee, like if you get like a scratch or a graze, it'll swee. It kind of stings. But yeah, kind of burn with that mixture of blood and of fire. Oh, it's fine, have a wet. Have a drink. Nah, says I, know a sip. Then he puts it away and he draws out his pipe. So the devil's put the hip flask away and he gets his pipe out. And he surely forget for doing his hand games, and he lifts the head call without tacking the things. So he surely forgot, and down his hand goes, and he lifts a hot coal without taking the tongs. You're at him with the fire, and I says we get gin. And with this hath he slips it and looks kind of thin. And Rasmus is saying, oh, you're at home with the fire. He says with the gun, that's kind of like almost like a bit of a growl, I guess, almost. And with this, the devil slips the coal and looks kind of angry at having forgotten himself. But he smiles the next minute and nods through the smoke. And he says, you are rather a humorous book. So the devil smiles the next minute and nods through the smoke. And he says, you're rather a humorous bloke. Don't you think now that you are a little adrift? Don't you think now you'd like to succeed, get a lift? To be something decent, some big reverend on. Distinguish yourself, man, in fact, to get on. You're as simple tonight as you were in your youth. The thing that pays best is what I call the truth. That is the view which I wish to reveal. Says I, faith, I do't, honest man, you're the deal. And Rasmus responds, going, faith, very Shetland exclamation, that kind of, goodness, I doubt, honest man, you're the devil. But in Shetland dialect we say I do't. It's not actually I doubt, it's like I believe. It's a kind of weird one. So if you say, oh, I doubt it's gonna rain, I doubt it's gonna rain, it's actually you're saying I think it is going to rain. So he's basically saying, I think, honest man, you're saying you're honest, I think you're the devil. So this is him telling the devil he knows who he thinks is, who he knows he is. Then he smirked at me and he sleeked his hair, for his horn was cocked at the grain of the air. So the devil sort of smirks, that may be a Shetland word, kind of smiles at him. It's kind of a smirk, is more of a, more kind of attitude. He smirks at him and smooths his hair, for his horn was cocked a little bit in the air. So he's kind of adjusting his hair to hide his horns again. Well, supposing I am now, he says, nodding thrice. So you're nodding 3 times. Though it comes from the devil, it's still good advice. I'll tell you what, Rasmus, just listen, keep cool. You're a great many different kinds of a fool. You scoundrel, says I, and I raised me fit. Out of this with the henty cell heckle no flit. So that's obviously upset Rasmus, so he jumps to his feet and he yells, you scoundrel. gets to his feet. Out of this sort of, out of this where they kind of get out, Henty style is sort of take yourself off, like get out, and heckle now flit. To flit is to move, kind of get out. Then I gives the silk hat a grit rise with me clug. He kicks the devil's hat with his. So old Shetlanders would wear clogs. Like wooden clogs. So he kicks the devil's hat with his clog and slips no me grip up a poor Seamus's lug, and he lets go of his grip on the poor dog's ear. While thinking it time for to gie him a sag, sank his yackles fair into the back of his leg. So the dog, who thinking it's time to give him a grip, give him a bite basically, sank his teeth fair into the ball of his leg, like into his calf. So he springs to his feet and making a claw for me gans he clures by the shoulders awa. So the devil springs to his feet and makes a grab for Ramsay's jumper, sweater, and he clures by the shoulders awa. So he kind of tears both the shoulders away from the jumper, or kind of knitted sweater like. With e hand I grips down the breast o' his cot. So with one hand I grip the breast of his coat, and I yokes with the idder the slack o' his throat, and he grabs the devil by the throat with his other hand. Then his fist comes as black as the very ill health. Then his face comes as black as the very devil himself, and he aims me a lick just under the belt. So the devil's face goes dark, and he goes to hit Razmi under the belt, which is below the belt. Would do villain, I yells, getting mad. He's like, would you villain, kind of how dare you? Seamus yells, getting mad, and say with the cuff of his neck tacks the lad, and so he grabs the devil by the neck, by the scruff of his neck, and there on the floor as we stood in the midst, I shacks him the same as Buggy did. So I think he's kind of he's grabbed him by the cuff of his neck, so maybe he's grabbed him by the sort of collar of his clothes. And as they stood there in the middle of the floor, he just shook him. Erasmi shook the devil like a bag of husks, till I feels me old arm beginning to tire, until his arm gets tired. Then away he goes fair on his sit in the fire, and he casts the devil in. The devil falls on his bum, the seat of his pants in the fire. But he up and set out of the put was caught. But he got up, and as he did so, out of the pocket of his coat, came the tail he had there rolled up in a knot. Came the tail that he had rolled up there in a knot. So basically, the devil had rolled his tail up and tucked it into the pocket of his coat. So he got up, his tail came out. It lies on the floor for a minute and smocks, then spoots to the length like the jack of the box. So it lay for a moment and smoked on the floor, like on the floor, smoking. He just sat in the fire, and then it's kind of spooted to the length. It kind of like unfurled, like a jack in the box. It kind of sprung out to its length, kind of unrolled. And seaman he yokes the smart end in his jaws, and the dog grabs the smart, the end of the tail in his jaws, and scritted it fiercely with both of his paws, and he's scratching away at it like fiercely with both of his paws. Then we wrestled again, and good trath I'll be bound. So they start wrestling again. I don't really know how to directly translate the end. Good trath I'll be bound. It was, they're wrestling for a quarter an hour. You didn't know how to sound. I'll be bound that for a quarter of an hour you wouldn't have heard a sound, but the cracking of shares and the clump o' a clug, the skrit o' a cliff and the yelp o' a dug. So that's basically we were wrestling again, and I'll be bound that for a quarter of an hour you wouldn't have heard a sound, but the cracking of chairs and the kind of clump of the clog, the kind of, and the scratching of the hoof and the yelp of the dog as he struck now and then at the crooked and the links. When the lad swung his tail, it a een o' his jinks. So basically you would heard the yelp of the dog as he struck now and then in the so you have the crook and the links as a chain and hook in the fireplace for holding the kettle. So in the traditional fireplace they would have had this chain and hook, which they called the crook and the links. And so as the dog had the devil's tail in his mouth, and as he was like getting spun around, they were fighting. The dog kept getting like smacked amongst all the things. So that's when the lad swung his tail into Eno's jink. So yeah, they're basically, the dog's getting swung around because not letting go of the devil's tail. For Seaman poor trow with his legs in a bing. As for the dog, poor thing with his legs in a heap, he'd hustling around like the stain in the sling. So it's like, almost like a stone in a sling. This dog's just going spinning round. Then I draws me force. Obby by to the door. So he drags the devil by force over to the door. And with this he comes out to be an on Dominus roar. Oh, I maybe mispronounced that. Dominus roar. But yeah, basically the devil comes out with an extraordinary roar. And out of my hair feth he clackters a giotten. So, and out of my hair, the devil grabs a handful. Because clackters, it's kind of grabbing a giotten. It's like it's actually a double handful, so he grabs both hands. Now the door, since he left her, was still a grain open. So the door, since he left her, was still a little bit open. So grain open, so a little bit open. We me clug to eye Riesels had clean to the back. So the with the toe of his shoe, he kind of kicks the door open, clean to the back, violently kind of kicks the door open. And a yoke for the slack was breaked in I mac, and he grabs a handful of the slack of the devil's trousers and tacks him a hist wi' a mention of strength. And say on the Brigstains, I lands him his length. It's kind of like, doesn't translate exactly into English, but it's basically like he's grabbed the devil by his seat of his pants and he's chucked him out onto the path, out the front of the house, and the devil lands to his length. He kind of falls flat on the floor, and dads to the door. Maestland's line and cum. I think he slams the door. I don't really quite know Maestland's line and cum. I think he slams the door shut, and it kind of makes dust come up, kind of thing. The pair to his end, it was still in the room. Then he sprinkles and he plots wi' well. That's the door. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the exact translation of that is. because there's a few words there I'm not very familiar with. But basically the gist of it is he's thrown him out the door, and the devil is writhing and whining and wailing out on the pavement because look, man, ras me, you're broken me tail. The devil's tail is caught in the door, so the devil's like wailing and writhing about on the floor outside, and because his tail's stuck in the door. So after a minute I ages the door, so after a minute Razmi opens the door just a fraction, and he arrives his tail through the crack with a snore, so he pulls his tail out to the door, and Seaman, poor worm, still rowding not, and the poor dog still all balled up in a ball, strikes the jam at the door with a deuce like a shot, so the dog tries to go after the tail and comes up against the door jam. I say he's strip it off and he yicks and growls, so when the dog hits against the door he has to let go of the tail, and he's kind of barking and growling and not very happy. And then when he can't win out, sits and yowls, so when the dog can't get outside he just sits and howls inside the house because he's not happy about not being able to keep biting on the devil. In the meantime the black boy, he breathes him a bit. So in the meantime the devil, he's catching his breath. Then he comes for the door with a rip with his foot, and he hunches with poor with his cliff till a stain. So basically then once he's caught his breath he comes back at the door with like a bit of a run, and he puts his shoulder down and charges into the door, kind of getting his hoof to the stone and kind of really kind of pushing into the door with his shoulder. But the mace that he heard was ain should have bane. But the only harm he did was hurting his own shoulder. For there as I stood hath, I stick her fast, with a tae clug like the step of the mast. So, but he didn't budge the door at all, because Erasmus is standing there behind the door, holding it shut fast with his foot. He's saying like the step of the mast. So a mast would have like something in place that's holding it upright and in place. So he's relating his clogged the clog, his foot to that. He's holding the door firmly shut. Then after a start with his mouth at the hall, he says we assumed it was mostly after all. So then after a little while, with his mouth at the hole of the door, he says with a sound that was mostly after all. I think that's kind of you could hardly understand what you're saying. As he twisted his face up and gurned and jammed, as he twisted his face up and was making faces and angry and everything. And at this point, this is where the devil has dropped the nice, posh English voice he was using up till now. Nee, Rasmus, I'll get thee to sure to be damned. So he's saying, Rasmus, I'm gonna get you one day, you're sure to be damned. And Rasmus just replies, nah, faith I says, boy, old Rasmus is faith. Just kinda, no, I am good. You're not getting me. Then he hankered his tail over Elbic and left. The devil sort of hankered. I'm trying to think, you get a really good Shetland Dialect word, and I'm trying to think of how would I describe that. And he kind of like humped his tail over his elbow and sort of storming off down the path. Because it's not just kind of like hanging his tail over his elbow, it's kind of like you can think of a hank, kind of like throwing his tail over his elbow and storming off down the path. So, yeah, so basically this old Rasmus is having none of the devil's nonsense at all. But I just love the imagery, how he's sort of dropping hints as to who it is that he's speaking to before he even really realises. And then they have their whole fight, and you have the devil being very, very polite but incredibly rude at the same time. And then Rasmus is having none of it. And they end up having this big fight, and just the imagery of them flying around their room, and this dog flying around, teeth in the devil's tail, and the imagery of them having this big fight, and then the Rasmus throwing the devil out the door and sending him packing and having none of his nonsense. Kind of a story of don't underestimate these kind of often reserved, because I mean traditional Shetlanders will often not really speak much about their faith. They're not like in your face religious types, but they'll have a solid faith. A lot of the kind of older ones will have the kind of solid. My granny never really spoke much about her faith, but she had a solid faith. And they'll not take nonsense, and they'll not be shaken. So yeah, when the devil's like, I'm gonna get you, he's like, no, I'm good, you're not gonna get me. So yeah, I just love that poem, the imagery and the language and and just the dialect. I do love Shetland dialect. So as I said, this is one that we studied at school, and I really did love studying it at the time. So I just thought I'd share it with you guys. And it's been one I've been meaning to share for a while, and I thought now is as good a time as any. So yeah, I hope you enjoy, and I'll try and get some more. So I've read some Shetland dialect children's books. They're up the stairs now, I don't have them here. And I will try and get more like Shetland dialect stories or poems to read to you. I could do some reading ones where, like, if I was to get like a Shetland dialect story, I could just read it to you and not translate. But that's where, if you let me know if you like having the translation. I don't know how much of it you can follow without me providing, because although it's referred to as a Shetland dialect, it's a mix of Old Norse and Old Scots, and it's different enough from English that it's I would really call it its own language. We have our own dictionary. There's enough like distinct words and slightly different grammar. We use quite Old Norse grammar. Apologies. I'll edit the yawn out. We use sort of Norse grammar, like do and dine, rather than you and yours. And so yeah, I kind of think it's really more of a language than a dialect. But officially it's referred to as a dialect. But it does mean that if you're an English speaker you might not understand. So yeah, let me know if you like having the translations with them. But anyway, I'm gonna quit rambling for now, and I'm gonna go get quite a late dinner and maybe let the cats in because I can see them out the window. Yeah, until then, take care, and I will catch you in another video sometime soon. But yeah, I'll see you in a video sometime soon.